The scrapyard floated in the darkness of space like a graveyard for forgotten dreams, and thousands of dead ships drifted in slow circles around a dying red star that gave barely enough light to see by Empress. Kithara Velsorn moved through the shadows of the docking bay with the silence of a hunter. Her forearms pressed close to her body beneath the rough fabric of a laborer's cloak, and her heart beat with a mixture of fear and fury that she had not felt in 300 years of rule. 3 days ago, she had been the most powerful being in 4,000 star systems, and now she was nothing more than a fugitive running from her own admirals. The coup had come without warning, and High Admiral Zorvath had smiled at her across the throne room even as his soldiers raised their weapons, and she had barely escaped with her life through passages that only the royal bloodline knew existed. Her ship waited for her in the darkness. The Vira's Shadow, a sleek cruiser that had served her family for generations, and she climbed aboard with relief flooding through her exhausted body. But something was wrong. She could hear it immediately, a soft humming sound coming from deep within the ship, and her hand went to the blade hidden beneath her cloak as she moved toward the source. The engine room door slid open, and Kithara froze at the sight before her. A creature lay sprawled across the floor, surrounded by scattered tools and bits of wire and metal, and it was making a horrible sound that rumbled from its throat in a rhythm that suggested sleep. She had seen humans before, but only from a distance, and the Velkarath Dominion considered them a primitive species barely worth noticing. Yet here one was, unconscious in her personal ship, with grease smeared across its face and a half-eaten food bar clutched in one hand. Her first instinct was to kill it, and her blade was halfway drawn before she noticed something that made her stop completely. The EL drive was running. That was impossible. And she knew it was impossible because 3 different engineers from 3 different species had examined the drive after the sabotage, and all 3 had declared it beyond repair. Yet the human had somehow fixed it, and the evidence of his work was everywhere in the form of strange modifications that looked crude but clearly functioned. Kithar knelt beside the sleeping human and pressed her blade against his throat, and his eyes snapped open with a speed that surprised her. He did not scream or beg or try to fight, and instead he simply blinked at her several times before his gaze moved to the blade and then back to her face. "Oh, hey," he said in a voice rough with sleep. "Cool ship." But the previous owner really did not understand how quantum harmonics work, and I had to bypass the whole system with some copper wire and spite. "So do you have any coffee?" Kithara stared at him and tried to process his words, and she found that she could not understand most of what he had said. "What is coffee?" she demanded. "It is a hot drink that makes humans functional," he replied, as if this explained everything. "And without it I am basically useless. So if you are going to kill me, can you at least let me wake up properly first?" She pressed the blade harder against his skin, and a thin line of red appeared. But he did not flinch away from the pain. "Who are you, and why are you on my ship?" she asked. "My name is Jake Reyes, and I'm a mechanic," he said calmly. "I ended up stuck in this scrapyard when some very rude people took my ship to pay off a debt that I definitely did owe them. And I have been hiding in old wrecks for 2 weeks, trying to find something that could fly. And this ship looked promising, except the engine was completely destroyed. But I figured I could fix it, because I can fix anything if you give me enough time and wire." "You fixed an Imperial FTL drive with wire?" Kithara asked in disbelief and spite. Jake added helpfully. "Never underestimate spite as an engineering tool. And also I found some interesting crystals in the cargo hold that worked as replacement capacitors. And honestly, the original design was way too complicated, so I simplified it. She should kill him." And every instinct she had developed over centuries of survival told her to end this threat immediately. But she needed to run. And he had given her the means to do so. Kithara pulled her blade away and stood back. And Jake sat up slowly while rubbing his neck where the cut was already closing. "So are you going to kill me or not?" he asked with what seemed like genuine curiosity, because I would like to know either way. "And waiting is kind of stressful. You are going to be my mechanic," she said in a tone that allowed no argument. "I need to reach the other side of the galaxy, and I will pay you enough credits to buy a new ship and clear your debts. And in return, you will keep this vessel running until I no longer need you." Jake considered this for a moment, and then shrugged with a casualness that irritated her deeply. "Sure, that works for me," he said. "But I should warn you that I talk a lot when I am awake, and I eat things that most species consider toxic, and I sleep at random times, because my body never learned how schedules work. So if any of that bothers you, then this is going to be a long trip." "I will manage," Kithara replied coldly. She did not tell him who she really was, and instead she claimed to be a noblewoman fleeing an arranged marriage to a cruel lord. And she kept her bioluminescent markings suppressed beneath her skin where he could not see them. Jake listened to her story with an expression that suggested he did not believe a single word of it. But he said nothing about his doubts, and simply nodded along as if everything made perfect sense. "All right, lady, whatever your name is," he said when she finished. "Let us get out of this graveyard before someone notices your fancy ship is not actually dead. And also, I really do need coffee or something similar. So please tell me you have supplies." Kithara watched him move to the control panel with a strange confidence that did not match his ragged appearance. And she noticed that his hands were covered in scars that spoke of years of hard work. He was nobody, a human from a species that her empire barely acknowledged existed. Yet he had done something that her own engineers could not, perhaps. Keeping him alive had been the right choice after all. "There are supplies in the storage compartment," she said, "and we leave immediately." Jake grinned at her, and his smile was bright and strange and completely unafraid. And Kithara felt something she had not expected: curiosity. "Then let us fly," he said, as the engines roared to life beneath them. And the very shadow rose from the graveyard of forgotten ships and shot toward the stars. Like a bird escaping a cage, for the first time in 3 days, Kithara allowed herself to feel hope. And beside her, the human was already talking about improvements he wanted to make to the navigation system. She had a feeling this journey was going to be very different from anything she had experienced before. The stars stretched into long lines of light as the Vera's shadow jumped into hyperspace. And Kithara felt the familiar pull of faster-than-light travel settling into her bones like an old friend. 3 days had passed since they left the scrapyard. And in that time, she had learned something important about humans. They never stopped talking. Jake Reyes moved through her ship like he owned it, and he touched every system with his scarred hands while muttering to himself about improvements and modifications and something he called optimization. He had named the electrical grid Mr. Sparky, and he spoke to it like it was alive. And when she asked him why, he simply said that machines worked better when you were nice to them. That is not how technology functions. She had told him coldly. "Maybe not for your species," he replied with a shrug. "But humans have always believed that things have spirits. And whether it is true or not does not really matter because it makes me feel better." He was infuriating in ways she could not fully describe. And yet she found herself watching him more often than she should. The way he solved problems was unlike anything she had ever seen. And he did not approach challenges with logic or careful planning, but instead seemed to throw himself at them with wild energy until something worked. On the 4th day, the assassins found them. Kithara was in the cockpit when the alarm screamed to life, and she saw them on the scanner immediately. A swarm of hunter drones cutting through hyperspace on an intercept course. "We have company," Jake said from beside her. and his voice was calm in a way that seemed wrong for someone facing death. "Drone swarm," she replied as her hands flew across the controls. 40 units, maybe 50, and they are designed to tear ships apart piece by piece. And we cannot outrun them in hyperspace. "Then we do not run," Jake said. And he was already moving toward the engineering section with a strange light in his eyes. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Something stupid," he called back. "Give me 2 minutes." She did not have 2 minutes, and the drones were closing fast with their cutting lasers already warming up. But she pushed the engines as hard as she dared while Jake made crashing sounds somewhere in the back of the ship 1. Minute passed and the drones were almost in range. "Jake!" she shouted, almost done. He yelled back. The first drone latched onto the hull, and she could hear its lasers beginning to cut through the metal. And then Jake appeared in the doorway with a wild grin on his face. "Hit the external vent release," he ordered. "What?" "Just do it." She did not understand, but she trusted him. And her hand slammed down on the control. A massive cloud of something erupted from the ship's exterior vents. And the effect on the drones was immediate and devastating. Their sensors went dark and their movements became erratic. And one by one they spiraled away into the void as their systems failed completely. "What did you do?" Kithara asked in amazement. "I rerouted the sewage system through the external vents," Jake said proudly. "Human waste contains chemicals that are really bad for delicate electronics. And I figured drone sensors would not be designed to handle biological contamination, because who would be crazy enough to weaponize their own garbage?" She stared at him and could not find words to respond. "Humans would," he added helpfully. "We have been using gross stuff as weapons for thousands of years. And one time, we even threw dead bodies over castle walls to spread disease. So really, this is one of our less disgusting tactics." Kithara felt something shift in her understanding of this strange species. And she realized that humans did not think like other beings. They did not calculate odds or weigh options carefully. And instead, they simply acted on instinct and trusted themselves to find a solution. It was madness. And yet it worked. The days that followed were quieter. And Kithara found herself spending more time with Jake. As he worked on the ship, he told her stories about Earth, the human homeworld, and about the colony where he grew up on a frozen moon far from the center of civilization. It was not much, he admitted one evening as they sat in the common room. Just a few thousand people trying to make a living in a place that wanted to kill us every day. But we managed because that is what humans do. What happened to it? She asked. His face went still for a moment, and she saw old pain flash through his eyes. "Plague came," he said quietly. "Some alien disease that jumped species, and we called for help, but nobody came because we were not important enough. And by the time I was old enough to leave, there was nobody left to stay for." She did not know what to say, and the silence stretched between them until Jake suddenly stood and walked to a storage cabinet. "I found this earlier," he said as he pulled out a small box covered in dust. "It looked broken, so I fixed it. And I do not know what it is, but it seemed important." Kithara's heart stopped when she saw it. It was her mother's music box. A gift from her childhood that she had kept hidden for centuries. And she had thought it lost forever when the sabotage damaged the ship. "You fixed it?" she whispered. "It was not hard," Jake said with a shrug. "Just some gears that needed cleaning and a spring that needed replacing. And I found similar parts in the cargo hold." He handed it to her and she opened it with trembling hands. And the melody that emerged was the same one her mother had played for her when she was young and afraid, and the universe seemed. 2 big tears fell from her eyes before she could stop them. And her disguise cracked as emotion overwhelmed her careful control. Jake saw it, and she knew he saw it. The flash of silver light beneath her skin. The way her posture shifted into something more regal than any common noblewoman could manage. But he said nothing, simply sat back down and looked at the stars through the window. And he gave her the privacy to compose herself without asking questions or demanding explanations. "Thank you," she said when she could speak again. "No problem," he replied softly. "Everyone deserves to have something that reminds them of home. And whatever you are running from, whoever you really are, that does not change the fact that you miss someone. And missing people is something humans understand very well." Kithara looked at this strange creature who fixed impossible things and weaponized garbage, and somehow saw through her disguise without fearing what lay beneath. She was beginning to think that perhaps the galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. The shattered moons of Kethvora hung in space like broken teeth, and the station built into the largest fragment was a haven for criminals and refugees and anyone else who wanted to disappear from the galaxy's watchful eyes. Kithara guided the ship toward the hidden dock with practiced ease, and beside her Jake watched the chaotic traffic of smuggler vessels and pirate ships with wide, curious eyes. "Friendly place," he commented dryly. "It is not," she replied. "But my contact here is loyal, and he will provide us with supplies and safe passage to the next sector. And then we will be beyond the reach of those who hunt me." She did not tell him that the contact was Lord Marek, one of her oldest allies and a supporter of her family for generations. And she did not tell him that this was supposed to be the end of running and the beginning of planning. They landed without incident, and Kithara led Jake through winding corridors that smelled of rust and recycled air. And she felt tension building in her chest with every step. Something was wrong. Lord Marek's safe house was in the lower levels of the station, hidden behind a gambling den that served as cover. And when they reached the entrance, she knew immediately that her fears were justified. The door was open and the smell of blood drifted out into the corridor. "Stay behind me," she ordered Jake as she drew her blade. They moved through the rooms quickly and found the bodies of Marek's guards first, cut down by energy weapons with precision that spoke of professional killers. Lord Marek himself was in the back room, slumped against the wall with a hole burned through his chest. And Kithara felt her heart clench with grief and rage. "I am sorry, old friend," she whispered. "We need to leave," Jake said urgently. "If the people who did this are still here, then we are walking into a trap." He was right, but his warning came too late. The assassins emerged from the shadows with weapons raised, 6 of them in the dark armor of the High Admiral's personal guard. And their leader stepped forward with a smile that made Kithara want to tear his face off. "The Empress runs far, but not far enough," he said in a mocking tone. "High Admiral Zorvath sends his regards, and he wanted me to tell you that your throne has already been claimed. So there is nothing left for you to run toward." Jake moved beside her and she saw him reaching for a tool on his belt. And she knew he was planning something stupid. "Do not," she said quietly. "Too late," he replied. And he threw the tool at the nearest light fixture. The room plunged into darkness, and Kithara moved on instinct, her forearms striking out with deadly precision as her blade found the throat of the closest assassin. Jake had somehow gotten his hands on a fallen guard's weapon and was firing wildly, while shouting words in a human language she did not understand. And the chaos was enough to give them a chance, but the assassins were trained, and they adapted quickly. And a shot caught Kithara in the side as she tried to reach the door. Pain was immense, and she felt her body's emergency systems activating, pumping healing agents into her blood. But the damage was already done. Her biosuppression implant failed silver, and violet light erupted from her skin as her true form revealed itself. And the bioluminescent markings of Velkorath royalty blazed through the darkness like a beacon. The assassins froze in shock, and even Jake stopped moving as the weight of her presence filled the room. The psionic aura of an empress that had been compressed and hidden for so long. Killer. The assassin leader screamed, but his hesitation had cost him everything. Kithor moved with the speed of her ancestors, and her blade cut through 3 more enemies before they could raise their weapons. And Jake somehow managed to shoot the 5th one in the leg before tackling him to the ground. The leader ran, and she let him go because her body was failing, and staying conscious was becoming harder with every passing second. "Jake," she gasped. As she fell against the wall, he was beside her instantly, and his hands pressed against her wound with a pressure that hurt but kept her focused. "Okay, so you are definitely not a noblewoman running from a marriage," he said, and his voice was shaking, but his hands were steady. "I am Empress Cathara Valsorn of the Velkarath Dominion," she admitted, "and I rule 4,000 worlds, or at least I did until my admirals decided they wanted war more than peace. And now I am bleeding on a station floor in the company of a human mechanic." Jake stared at her with an expression she could not read, and she waited for the fear, the awe, the betrayal that always came when lesser species learned who she truly was. Instead, he nodded once and said, "Can you walk, Your Majesty? Because we really need to move before more of those guys show up." She laughed, and the sound was broken and painful but genuine. "You are not afraid of me," she said in wonder. "I have been afraid plenty of times," Jake replied as he helped her to her feet. "But right now I am more worried about keeping you alive than being impressed by your title. So let us save the royal treatment for when we are not surrounded by dead bodies." They made it back to the ship somehow, and Jake half carried her through the corridors while she bled silver blood onto his clothes. And he did not complain. Once in the medical bay, he worked on her wound with hands that knew more about machines than bodies. But his care was gentle, and his focus was absolute. "Tell me the truth," he said as he applied the healing patch. "What is really happening here?" So she told him everything. She told him about the coup and High Admiral Zorvith and the faction that wanted to restart the ancient wars of expansion. And she told him about the billions who would die if the Dominion turned its war machine against the peaceful sectors of the galaxy. "Human colonies are on the border," she finished. "Your people will be among the first to fall if Zorvith takes full control." Jake went very still, and something changed in his eyes, a hardness that had not been there before. "Then we take your throne back," he said. She laughed bitterly. "I have no army, no allies, no resources, and the most powerful fleet in the galaxy is hunting me. So how exactly do you propose we accomplish that?" Jake looked at her, and his smile was sharp and dangerous and utterly human. "You have a ship that works," he said. "You have a mechanic who is too stubborn to quit. And you have access to something Zorvith does not understand. What is that?" she asked. "Humans," Jake replied. "We are scattered across this galaxy in colonies that everyone ignores. And we work in every port and every station as mechanics and traders and laborers. And we have spent centuries being underestimated. So when word gets out that someone threatens our people, you will see exactly what my species can do when we are angry." Kithara studied this strange being who knelt beside her with blood on his hands and fire in his eyes. And she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she first saw him. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Jake was quiet for a moment before he answered. "I grew up on a dying colony," he said. "I watched my family die to a plague that nobody cared about. And I clawed my way to the stars with nothing but my hands and my stubbornness. So I have seen enough to know that titles do not make someone invincible. And empresses bleed just like everyone else." He met her eyes, and she saw no deception in him. "But the fact that you ran instead of surrendering," he continued. "The fact that you are still fighting even when everything is lost, that makes you dangerous. And I like dangerous." Cathara reached out with one of her hands and touched his face, and the light from her markings reflected in his eyes. "And let us be dangerous together," she said. 2 months had passed since the night Kithara nearly died on the shattered moons. And in that time, the galaxy had begun to change. It started small, with whispers in dark corners and messages passed through hidden channels. And the word spread like fire through dry grass. The Empress lived. And she was coming back. Jake had been right about humans. They were everywhere, working in ports and stations across the outer rim. And when he reached out to them through networks that Kithara had not known existed, they answered mechanics sabotage patrol ships that hunted for the Empress. Traders smuggled supplies to loyalist cells, and workers in communication hubs intercepted military transmissions and fed the information to rebel commanders. How did you organize all of this? Kithara asked as she watched another report come in from a human operative on a distant station. Jake shrugged in that maddening way of his and said, "Humans have been forming secret networks since we learned to write. And we call it sticking together. And it is basically the only reason we survived long enough to reach the stars." The rebellion grew stronger with every passing week, and loyalists who had been hiding came forward to pledge their support. And pirates who had no love for the Dominion's strict laws offered their ships in exchange for pardons. But it was Jake who changed everything. Sat in strategy meetings with admirals and generals who had served for centuries. And he said things that made them stare at him in confusion and outrage. "You want to attack that convoy directly?" Admiral Thasara asked one day, her silver scales rippling with anger. "That is suicide. And the convoy is protected by 3 warships, and we have only 7 vessels. I do not want to attack it directly," Jake replied calmly. "I want to fill 20 cargo haulers with boarding troops and have them approach the convoy as normal merchant traffic. And by the time the warships realize what is happening, our people will already be on board their ships. That is deception." General Korvath spat. "It is dishonorable and beneath the dignity of true warriors." "It is how humans won most of our wars," Jake said. "We even have a name for it, and we call it the Trojan horse. After a story so old that nobody remembers if it was real." Kithara watched the argument unfold and then raised her hand for silence. "We will try the humans' plan," she said. The attack on the convoy was a complete success, and the 3 warships were captured with minimal casualties because nobody expected danger from simple merchant vessels. Word spread quickly. The Empress fights like a human. More victories followed, each one using tactics that the Dominion's traditional military could not anticipate. Jake rigged a fake distress beacon to lure an enemy cruiser into an ambush. And when General Korvath protested that it was a trap unworthy of honorable combat, Jake simply asked him how many soldiers would have died in a direct assault. The general had no answer. On another occasion, Jake personally infiltrated an enemy station by dressing as a maintenance worker and walking through the front door. And he spent 3 hours wandering the corridors while fixing actual problems before he finally reached the shield generator and disabled it. "Everyone ignores the janitor," he explained when he returned to a hero's welcome. "It is a universal truth that works on every species because nobody wants to pay attention to the person cleaning their floors." The rebellion changed in ways that went beyond tactics, and Kithara noticed that her officers were beginning to adapt. They asked questions that they would never have considered before, like, what would a human do? And is there a way to win without fighting directly? And the answers they found were reshaping the entire war. Admiral Zorvith noticed 2 reports came back from spies in the usurper's court, and they painted a picture of a leader becoming increasingly obsessed with understanding humans. He had ordered studies of Earth's history, and he pored over records of human wars. And what he found clearly disturbed him. "He is afraid," Jake said when Kithara shared the reports with him. "Not of you, but of what you represent." "What do I represent?" she asked. "A new way of thinking," Jake replied. "For thousands of years, the Dominion has believed that power comes from strength and discipline and honor. But now, there is an Empress who fights alongside humans, and that means the rules are changing. And Zorvath does not know how to fight a war without rules. She considered his words and found truth in them. The rebellion was not just a military campaign anymore, and it was becoming something larger. A symbol that the lesser species of the galaxy could stand beside the great powers as equals humans. We're not the only ones responding to that symbol. Representatives came from a dozen minor species, offering support and soldiers and ships, and they all said the same thing. If the Empress welcomes humans at her side, then perhaps she will welcome us too. Kithara found herself building something she had never imagined. An alliance based not on conquest or domination, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. One evening, she found Jake in a station cantina, deep in conversation with a pirate queen named Vex, who commanded a fleet of raiders that had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades. Absolutely not, Vex was saying when Kithara approached. I do not serve empresses, and I do not join causes, and my ships fly for profit and nothing else. Jake nodded seriously and said, I understand, and profit is important. So let me ask you this. How much did you make last year raiding Dominion supply convoys? Vex's eyes narrowed. Enough to keep my crews happy. And how much would you make if the Dominion's war fleet was destroyed and the trade routes were open to everyone? Jake asked, because right now Zorvath controls the most profitable sectors of the galaxy, and he is not sharing with independent operators. The Pirate Queen went quiet, and Kithara could see her calculating the possibilities. There is also the matter of the bounty on your head. Jake continued casually. Zorvath really does not like pirates, and once he finishes dealing with the rebellion, you are next on his list. So you can either wait for his fleet to come for you, or you can help us destroy it first. Vex stared at him for a long moment, and then laughed. A genuine sound of surprise and appreciation. I like you, human, she said. You argue like a pirate. I will take that as a compliment. Jake replied with a grin. 2 hours later, Vex's fleet had joined the rebellion, and Kithara asked Jake how he had known what to say. Humans have been convincing people who want to kill us to work with us for thousands of years, he said. It is basically our main survival strategy. And also I challenged her to a drinking contest earlier and won. So she already respected me a little bit. You outrank her in alcohol consumption? Kithara asked in disbelief. Human livers are surprisingly tough, Jake replied proudly. It is one of our few physical advantages. She shook her head and felt something warm spreading through her chest. Something that felt like hope mixed with affection. The galaxy was watching now. And what they saw was an Empress who fought with human cunning at her side. And whether that frightened them or inspired them, it was changing everything. High Admiral Zorvath had wanted to restart the ancient wars and conquer the galaxy through force. He was about to learn that the galaxy had new defenders, and they did not fight by the old rules anymore. The imperial capital of Velkar Prime hung in space like a jewel of impossible beauty, and its orbital rings glittered with the lights of 1,000 stations, while the Faustamite planet below shimmered with the glow of ancient cities. Kithara stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the usurpers' armada forming up to meet them. And she counted the enemy ships with a heavy heart. 300 warships, Admiral Thesara reported quietly. Against our 32. The odds were impossible, and everyone knew it. But they had come anyway, because this was the only chance they would ever have. High Admiral Zorvath had grown confident in his power, and he had pulled his forces back to the capital to crush the rebellion in one decisive battle. And that arrogance had created an opening that would never come again. Begin the operation. Kithara commanded. The battle started like any other, with the two fleets closing on each other while weapons charged and shields powered up. But what happened next was unlike anything the Dominion had ever seen. The rebel ships scattered in what looked like a desperate retreat. and Zorvath's fleet surged forward to pursue them, breaking their careful formation as individual captains raced to claim the glory of destroying the Empress. And then the chaos began. Electronic warfare systems that human volunteers had spent months designing activated across the enemy fleet, and targeting computers went haywire while communication channels filled with false orders and contradictory commands. Ships that had broken formation to chase the rebels suddenly found themselves isolated and surrounded, and the rebel fleet struck them one by one with coordinated precision. Zorvath screened orders from his command ship, but his captains could not hear him, and those who could hear did not know which orders were real and which were human deception. Unmanned cargo vessels loaded with explosives rammed into enemy cruisers, sacrificing themselves to cripple ships 10 times their size. And the tactic was so alien to Dominion, thinking that the warships did not even try to shoot them down. Humans call this asymmetric warfare, Jake had explained during the planning sessions. It means we do not fight the enemy where they are strong, and instead we make them fight where they are weak. The usurper's armada was strong in raw firepower and disciplined formations, but both of those advantages became worthless in the swirling madness of a battle where nothing worked as expected on the surface of Velcora Prime. Kithara led a strike team through the ancient passages of the Imperial Palace, the same passages she had used to escape so many months ago. Jake was with her because of course he was, and he had refused to stay on the ship despite her orders. "You are not going in there without someone to watch your back," he had said stubbornly. "And I did not fix your ship and join your war just to watch you die on a view screen." They moved through the darkness while the battle raged in orbit above them, and they encountered guards who died quickly beneath Kithara's blade and the weapons of her loyalist soldiers. The throne room waited at the heart of the palace, and when they finally reached it, High Admiral Zorvath was waiting for them. He stood before the throne of eternity with a ceremonial blade in his hands, and his armor was polished and perfect, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "You should not have come back," he said as Kithara stepped into the light. "The fleet will destroy your ships, and then nothing will remain of your pathetic rebellion." "Look outside," she replied calmly. The massive windows of the throne room showed the battle in orbit, and what Zorvath saw made his confidence crack. His armada was in chaos, ships burning and formations shattered, while the rebel fleet moved through the destruction like predators hunting wounded prey. "Impossible," he whispered. "Humans have a saying," Kithara said as she advanced toward him. "No plan survives contact with the enemy, and you plan for a war against enemies who fight like you do. But you did not plan for enemies who fight like humans." Zorva's face twisted with rage and contempt. "Humans! You have disgraced yourself by allying with primitives, and you have forgotten what made our species great." "Our species was great because we united others," she replied. "We were great because we brought peace to thousands of worlds, but you and your admirals forgot that. And you wanted to return to the old ways of conquest and domination, and you would have drowned the galaxy in blood." She stopped a few paces from him and raised her blade. "I am taking back my throne," she said, "and you can surrender or you can die, and those are the only choices left to you." Zorvath laughed bitterly and raised his own weapon. "Then I will die with honor, and future generations will remember me as the last true warrior of the Dominion." He charged at her with all the skill and fury of a soldier who had trained for centuries, and their blades met in a clash of light and sound that echoed through the ancient chamber. Kithara fought him blow for blow, her forearms moving in patterns that he could barely follow. But Zorvath was strong and fast and driven by desperation. The fight seemed endless until Jake stepped out from behind a pillar. He did not have a weapon, and he did not try to attack, but he held a small device in his hand, and his finger was on the activation switch. "Your Majesty," he said loudly, "I think the Admiral would like to know that I have been recording his private communications for the last 3 weeks." Zorvith froze, and his eyes went wide with sudden understanding. He has been very busy talking to foreign powers. Jake continued, promising them territory from the Dominion in exchange for their support. And he has also been quite clear about his plans to eliminate any species he considers inferior, which includes pretty much everyone who's not Velkorth. The device in his hand was already broadcasting. And across the Dominion, billions of citizens watched their screens as recordings of Zorvan's treasonous communications played for all to see. His own words condemned him, his own plans exposed for every soldier in his fleet to hear. "You dare!" Zorvath screamed, and he turned away from Kithara to charge at Jake instead. It was exactly what she had been waiting for. Blade took him through the back and emerged from his chest, and his cry of rage became a gurgle of pain as he fell to his knees. "You fought without honor," she said as she withdrew her weapon. "And so you died without honor." The battle ended shortly after when the surviving enemy ships surrendered, their crews unwilling to fight for a traitor whose crimes had been laid bare before the entire Dominion. Ithera stood before the throne of eternity and felt the weight of her crown settling onto her head once more. And the people gathered before her bowed in respect, but she had one more thing to do before she could rest. "Jake Raz," she said. And her voice carried through the chamber with the power of an Empress. Restored, Jake stepped forward awkwardly, still wearing his mechanic's clothes that were now torn and stained with the blood of battle. And he looked deeply uncomfortable with all the attention. "You fixed my ship when I had nothing," she said. "You stayed by my side when you had no reason to. And you gave me the tools to win a war that should have been impossible." She descended from the throne and stopped before him, and she saw nervousness in his eyes for the first time since she had met him. "I offer you anything you desire," she continued. "Wealth beyond measure, titles and lands. Even a planet of your own to rule as you see fit." Jake was quiet for a moment, and then he smiled. That same strange human smile she had come to know so well. "I want a treaty," he said. "Equal protection for human colonies, a seat at the table for humanity in galactic affairs, and a promise that my people will never again be ignored when they call for help." Kithara felt her heart swell with respect and affection. "It is granted," she said, "and more, because I name you the first human ambassador to the Velkorth Dominion. A position that will ensure your voice is heard in every decision that affects your species." The audience erupted in whispers and murmurs. But Kithara did not care. She had just changed the future of the galaxy, and she had done it with a human mechanic at her side later. After the ceremonies were complete and the celebrations had quieted, she found Jake in the engine room of her personal cruiser, covered in grease and muttering to himself about optimization. "You could have asked for anything," she said from the doorway. He looked up and shrugged in that infuriating way of his. "I got what I wanted, and besides, someone has to keep this ship running." She moved to sit beside him and watched him work. And the stars beyond the viewport seemed brighter than they had in centuries. "The galaxy is going to be different now," she said quietly. "Different can be good," Jake replied. "And humans have always believed that the future should be better than the past. So maybe that is what we will help you build." Kithara reached out and took one of his hands in her own, and she felt the calluses and scars of a lifetime of hard work. "When I first found you sleeping in my engine room, I thought you were a nuisance," she admitted. "I probably was," he agreed. "Now, I cannot imagine facing the future without you," she finished. Jake smiled and squeezed her hand gently, and his eyes held a warmth that needed no words to express outside the ship. An empire was rebuilding under a new philosophy, one that valued cooperation over conquest and welcomed all species as equals. The humans were no longer ignored, and in the engine room of an imperial cruiser, an Empress sat beside a mechanic and watched the stars together, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility.